No. Testing. There we go. Okay. Can I just make sure everybody grabs a seat and we'll get started as soon as they give us the thumbs up that we are live. All right. We are going to get started. So good afternoon. I hope everybody had a wonderful lunch and is all refreshed to go for this session on collective action. My name is Alexis Morgan. I am the Global Water Stewardship Lead at WWF. And as I guess a caveat and or warning at the beginning, I am fresh off of almost 7 weeks out of office, and this is my first work day back on a Sunday. Which, while nice, it's a bit of a warning that if I make some mistakes in the mix of all of this, it's due to my foggy vacation brain. So anyways, good, well done to all of us for being here on a Sunday and working on a Sunday. So that's my opening welcome. And today we are going to be talking on kind of this issue of collective action. There are, switch this over. We're going to be going through a few different things today. We have a pretty action-packed agenda, and I'm hoping a decent amount of interaction with all of you as an audience. So I'm going to be just giving a little bit of background on why we're here, what we're talking about, how we got into some of these different pieces before we hear from a number of different people around specific case studies, some of the efforts that are out there trying to amplify on collective action. And then we will be kind of coming back to a bit of a panel discussion, but I'd really like that to have participation and engagement from the audience as well. If you do have a cell phone with you and a QR reader, I will be putting up a QR code in a moment. So do be prepared for that as well. So that's kind of what to expect over the course of the next hour and a bit. And with my lovely face on screen here, I am going to be kind of going through a couple of things just in terms of the overview of what brought us here. So today, and the paper that is kind of at the heart of what we're talking about today has been kind of a long, in many ways, almost like decade plus exercise and journey. I think as we all know at this point, I don't want to repeat platitudes to this group, water is such a huge challenge that there's no way any one individual, one group, one initiative can solve it. We need to be working together. And that sounds like a great thing to do, but the reality and the practicality of getting initiatives, groups, organizations to collaborate and function together as a unified whole and getting to scale is really, really challenging. And it's not something that is done very easily. In fact, many of us have been trying to do this for a long time, and there are some really great success stories out there, but we still need to multiply those and even get those to a larger scale to have the kind of impact, because we need to be dealing, as the previous session, which was on innovative finance in this session room, was talking, we need much bigger scale of finance to tackle the water challenges. So that dialogue and that issue has been kind of eating at the back of my head for a very long time. As WWF, we're a giant, big NGO. We have lots of presence in lots of places, but ultimately, even we are way, way, way too small to be affecting change at the scale that we need to be. So this question of how do we work together with other NGOs? How do we work with groups of entities, and not just one-to-many relationships, but many-to-many relationships, has been something that's been kind of gnawing at me for a long time. So with that, about a year and a bit ago, a number of different actors began to kind of have a dialogue around coming back on this issue of collective action. It's been a dialogue space that this whole group has been talking about for quite a long time. The CO Water Mandate put out a document, I think, Jason, you'll remind me, it was around 2010, 11 on some of the collective action efforts. And we were at that even then, but we've learned a lot over the years. And it felt like it was time to kind of come back on this. So we put together this paper, or we have been working on this paper. So if you want to pull out your phones and pull down the QR code, because I'm going to kind of guide you into some of this paper. And I'd love for all of you to have a better look. Hopefully I'm not in the way. of this paper because it's sort of a work in progress. This is not a completed paper. It's a dialogue paper that all of us have been working on, and in this true spirit of collective action have been co-developing, co-editing. This is not a WWF paper. This is a collective paper. And I would encourage all of you, if you're interested, to weigh in on this as well. If you have ideas, you disagree with things, you fully agree with things, I would love to have people's inputs, and all of us can kind of continue to build this dialogue together. So a few things from this paper, if you can bring it up on your phones or whatever. Otherwise, if you don't have a phone or you just want to sort of listen to me ramble, you can do that too. But a few things to kind of flag within the paper. First of all, on page 6 of this paper, there is a working definition that we've sort of revisited on what do we mean by collective action? Because usually when it comes to these issues, you really do need to be working from a common language in order to be able to figure out what you all mean even. So that's one thing to have a look at in particular. On page 9, there's also a framework that begins to break apart the different forms of collective action. This is a bit of a draft framework, and it's something that we've been throwing around, but the idea that collective action isn't one thing, it's many different things, and it can take different shapes, forms, and times, and sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, sometimes it's really about action, sometimes it's about dialogue. It can be on ground, it can be at a global scale. There's lots of different things tied to that. Furthermore, on page 12, there's a diagram that shows a series of different roles, because ultimately, again, all of us are bringing different tools to the table and different things to the table. Some of us do convening well. Some of us bring finance to the table. Some of us have ground presence. Some of us have global policy presence. All of those different roles are quite critical ultimately to making effective collective action work on ground. On page 19 of the document and the section before that, there's a map. And this map was something that we all began to develop again in the lead up to New York this past year. And it was designed to try to understand where on ground are the places that may most make sense for us to go to ground and do collective action. And so we tried to put together some ideas. We looked at where is their need, where is their opportunity, all of those different things. And really, it's a map of opportunity for collective action. There's a bunch behind that. And if you want to understand the methodology, you can. That then map has helped to guide different entities and organizations, some of whom you'll be hearing from today. It's guiding some of the work of the Water Resilience Coalition. It's guiding some of the thinking from the Alliance for Water Stewardship. It's guiding some work from Science-Based Targets as well. So we've tried to put that map together, but again, have a look at that and see what you think. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, and where we are going from here, is the pathway forward. So how do we begin to actionably and tangibly take this to ground? Because that's really where the rubber meets the road. So on page 26 and beyond, we propose sort of some of the challenges of where we're facing, and we're proposing a bit of a model. There's a lot still to build out on that model. The idea and the analogy that we've used in that is a river system. And the idea of there's a lot that needs to be taken in from the tributaries at the headwaters. And that's ideas of everything from ideas, funding, resources, capacity. And then that needs to be aligned into something to kind of aggregate. And the idea that I think we're moving towards, although again, this is a dialogue process, so nothing is fixed, is to try to think about place-based basin sort of fund or collective action initiatives. That would not be a single winner takes all kind of idea, but rather an aggregation mechanism that then allows for sort of spending funds on a series of different pieces, but it allows for coordination of capital, coordination of capacity, coordination of efforts, so that there's air traffic control and not everybody's doing random different things in a given basin, but the pieces fit together. So it's like a puzzle assembly piece. So the idea that, you know, things come into that mainstream and then it goes into the delta, which is where the funds are being spent on a diversity of potential projects. So that's kind of the model that we're thinking about and working with, but this is going to be a live discussion going forward. If any of you are really keen on what we're talking about here and helping to kind of put this together, then there are going to be ongoing dialogues on this. You can certainly feel free to reach out to myself, to other people that are going to be on stage today. All of us can plug you in. And in fact, there is a bit of a working session later this week if you're really keen, for some of us that are going to be working on this. So with that, I am going to move us along to the first of our speakers. So perhaps you can welcome our Nabia to stage here, and we'll kick off with the different case studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, everybody can hear me? Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Nabia Ofosuama. I'm a senior corporate engagement advisor focused on water and resilience at the Nature Conservancy based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. People getting an echo? This is good. Okay. So I'm going to talk today on a case study of the Nature Conservancy's approach to collective action, as well as our work in the greater Cape Town area in South Africa. So first, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we are a global environmental nonprofit focused on environmental conservation. Our mission is to protect the land and water resources on which all life depends. We have a vision of a world where people and nature can thrive, and we really are operating globally at this stage. So you can see we work in 79 countries and territories, including all 50 US states. We have 1 million members and 5,000 staff, including 900 scientists. So the colors on the map, you can see in dark green, places where we have offices, in lighter green, places where we work through partners. And then we have over 450 freshwater focused projects, and you can see those in the blue dots on the map. So one of the types of programs that the Nature Conservancy undertakes are watershed investment programs, where we are working to invest at a watershed scale and thinking about bringing in and leveraging the power of nature to promote water security and climate resilience. So these are a lot of nature-based solutions focused projects that we try to take up to the scale of watersheds. One of our initiatives that you may have heard of is the Water Fund mechanism. So water funds are collective action governance platforms that bring together different water users, usually utilities, businesses, agriculture, and local government, to invest in ecosystem protection and upstream communities within the catchments they depend on. Water funds tend to work well in places where there are collections of water users kind of drawing from the same source. So a lot of times these are cities or municipalities, places where there might be a collection of industry, different water users. And then you can see in the diagram how they're kind of investing in upstream activities. These water funds have started as initiatives of the Nature Conservancy, and then oftentimes do spin off into their own organizations as well. And they take different forms depending on where they are, but there are some elements that they all have in common. So from this kind of program development phase into program implementation, we've seen 4 common phases that water funds are taking: pre-feasibility to feasibility, design, and then execution. We have supported over 50 water funds to date on every continent, and we have a dozen flagship programs that TNC continues to support. You can see those in blue. We've had a lot of success of this work in Latin America, developed a water funds partnership in Latin America, but you can see really partnerships moving in lots of different places around the world. So talking about collective action and the importance of bringing in stakeholders, you can see here across the different phases of the water fund where we bring in stakeholders and kind of how exactly this is done. So in the pre-feasibility phase, working to identify who might be the core partners, what is their interest in collaborating, where might they coordinate, what are the opportunities to leverage existing initiatives, to build upon those, and then understanding what is the existing institutional context. In the feasibility stage, trying to align on what is the priority intervention portfolio, what are the costs and benefits, so kind of return on investment analyses, to help bring in different partners to see the benefit of acting collectively. What are the needs and concerns of different funders or other stakeholders? And then is there social buy-in for these proposed NBS interventions? In the design phase, where either kind of a water fund is set up or we identify this initiative, we are obtaining stakeholder feedback on the operational structure. That could be funding, that could be governance, also securing funding commitments from these partners. And then throughout execution, ensuring that the leadership and governance parties are agreeing on their roles and responsibilities, and they have confidence in the program direction. So oftentimes these funds are setting up 5-year strategic plans that are reviewed and validated by the stakeholders. Those are implemented and then move into the next 5 years, for example. So bringing this to life in Cape Town, South Africa, as you all may remember, in 2018, Cape Town faced a severe water crisis. They were looking at day 0, the day where the city was going to run out of water. And you can see here kind of the before on the top and the after at the Tewaterskloof Dam of kind of what the water's levels were looking like. And one of the things that the Nature Conservancy and other partners looked at was this invasion of alien trees throughout the catchment. So 2/3 of the region's catchments kind of having this issue. These are pine trees that were planted a number of years ago for commercial logging purposes and have kind of taken over a lot of this region. So they're non-native species. There were a number of programs that already existed that were working to address this issue. The government had a Working for Water program. There were other partners who were working on this. And so TNC, working with partners, thought, is there something we could do about this specific nature-related problem? Could this help address the day 0 challenges that we're facing? And in 2018, we conducted a study and a business case to look at some priority subcatchments that were kind of significantly struggling with this issue, and identified that these areas were losing 55 billion liters of water per year due to these invasive species. And that's equivalent to about 2 months of the Cape Town water supply. We also found that if there was no action taken, the water losses were expected to double by 2045. In addition, we also conducted a return on investment analysis that was put into a business case that was released in April 2019 that looked at a number of different options for augmenting the water supply, including that invasive species removal, the desalination, water reuse, and groundwater exploration, and found that the removal of invasive alien plants in priority subcatchments was the most cost-effective option. So you can see the cost on the top and then the potential water yield as well, which was kind of equal to that 55 billion liters of water that was mentioned. It also could increase dry season water availability by 24%. And then there was also the case that there were additional benefits that supporting these nature-based solutions could bring, providing green jobs, biodiversity benefits to allow those native plants to regenerate, wildfire impacts, climate resilience, food security, and economic benefits as well. So through that stakeholder engagement process that I mentioned in the different phases, as we move through that kind of feasibility and design phase, we look to identify the different stakeholders and how they could potentially benefit from these programs. So you can see the stakeholders listed there: the City of Cape Town, corporations who are using water in the Cape Town area, government programs that were already existing, irrigation boards, water user associations, and the general public. And so tried to map those beneficiaries against what outcomes were most of interest to them, including their funding potential, the opportunity to align with additional interests, and then some places where these stakeholders may just be interested in general, but didn't necessarily know what their direct funding potential could be. So you can see those lines kind of moving from the stakeholders to the outcomes they were trying to achieve. And this really pointed us towards really focusing on restoring the watershed through controlling invasive plants, and then also opportunities to engage in wetland restoration as well, which is a part of the program, but a smaller piece of what the Water Fund is doing. So opportunities in your collective action processes to try to map beneficiaries, outcomes, and interventions. So over the past few years, we have formed this public-private partnership. You can see here national, regional, local government entities, NGOs, including the Nature Conservancy and WWF, and a range of corporations that you can see on this slide as well, both kind of internationally operating companies, but also locally based in South Africa, seeing those different opportunities to come together to support this work and to see those different benefits that they would like to see. We also did develop a steering committee late in 2019 of those partners that were kind of most interested. So you can see again, government stakeholders, corporations, nonprofits, kind of part of the steering committee that's helping to validate the business case, to develop the strategic plan, et cetera. The Nature Conservancy serves as the secretariat of that steering committee. And late last year, the Water Fund did become an independent entity from the organization, but TNC is still kind of staffing that up. And then there are individual working groups that are part of the steering committee as well. So some people focus on the data and operations, others are focused on monitoring and evaluation to ensure the success of these programs. And then there's also a sustainable funding working group that's looking at ensuring that the water fund is operating over time and we have enough funds available to execute. From a funding model perspective, there's been $18 million US dollars that have been raised for this initiative so far. And that's split about 56% coming from the private sector and the remaining 44% coming from the city of Cape Town. And so finally, I've talked a lot about kind of planning, the governance, how this was set up, but also, you know, when we're talking about collective action, really to focus on the action piece, what is happening on the ground and seeing this come to scale. So you can see some images here of the terrain, what this looks like. A lot of these are kind of the mountainsides. We're oftentimes needing helicopters to access them to get into some of these really densely forested areas. And so far, we've cleared 40,000 hectares, both initial clearing that was really dense and then more follow-up clearing. We've restored 13.8 billion liters of water per year and supported 770 green jobs, including 150 of these high-angle technicians who are trained to kind of go in on these helicopters and get to those areas. We also have established a decision support system that's publicly available on the link that you can see there that showcases kind of in real time as much as possible where we are with the clearing, what's happening. Each individual partner and funder can know the progress of the fund. So just in closing, I really appreciate that everybody's here focusing on collective action. This is something that's really important for the Nature Conservancy as we are trying to take this up to a watershed scale. I mentioned where we have water funds ongoing, but we also have other resources available, a toolkit. We also have a number of how-to guides. Some of the graphics came from those documents that are available online. And then we do also have a technical assistance facility that we are working with other partners to provide some of these resources to ensure collective action can kind of scale up in the places where we need most. I will also just mention that the work in Cape Town is part of the Water Resilience Coalition, which Jason Morrison will talk about later. This is a priority basin that was part of the map that Alexis mentioned. And then TNC is also a member of the Science Based Targets Network, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, trying to kind of bring our thinking and experience from around the world to these platforms as well. So appreciate the opportunity to share about the work in Cape Town and look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Right, hello, we're here as a double act because we are presenting on the collaboration between IDH and RAP. So we go on, thank you. And next slide after that as well, please. So who are we and why are we collaborating? So I'm Sophie, I'm here representing the Waste and Resources Action Programme, otherwise known as RAP. We are a UK NGO focused on delivering voluntary agreements that drive action across plastics, textiles and food. Within food, we're really focused on greenhouse gases, waste and water. And we can now officially say we are global as we operate in 40 countries across the world.
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm Christina, and I'll introduce IDH and what we do and why we are collaborating indeed and getting more detail into the project. So who is IDH and why are we here? IDH is a global organization, sort of forming coalitions with different stakeholders across global value chains with the aim and the joint vision to for sustainable trade and doing different program agendas towards that. IDH hosts CFAF, which is the lovely acronym for Sustainability Initiative Fruit and Vegetable. And we are a multi-stakeholder platform that are thriving the sustainability agenda in the fresh produce sector. And we are working, for example, on reducing the environmental footprint of these different supply chains, as well as promoting good water management. But we are here for water. And why are we then, RAP and I, collaborating? We, other than helping our members in the sustainability agendas, we have jointly identified 3 high-risk catchment areas around the world where we decided to collaborate, and those are southern Spain, Peru, and South Africa. So we are working with our members, driving the agenda and sort of having greater impact in these areas. So with that sort of context in mind, we are first and foremost aiming to really increase the health of these at-risk key catchment areas and enabling these food and drink businesses to also participate in this, and not only making this the sustainability of the production per se in the longer term, but also economically, socially, and environmentally. And how do we do that? We are aiming to set up different field level projects in these catchment areas. We are collaborating, so we are not duplicating our work, and we can have greater impact. And what would be a joint project without sharing the learnings, and really not only among us as NGOs, organizations, but also across these businesses. So with that context in mind, we're gonna tell you about who is really involved and what the projects look like. Thank you.
Thank you. So who's involved? Obviously, IDH and RAP, we're not doing this on our own. That would be a very hard task indeed. So we have different types of organization involved. RAP and IDH are really taking that convening, organizing role. So we're making sure that there are better project plans, there's funding in place, making sure they are on track and delivering the outcomes we need. And also, as we were saying, sharing learnings as far as wide to anyone who will listen to us. And we also have our project leads. So they are our on-the-ground experts. This is an approach we have both adopted. We are not the experts on the ground in the particular areas we're working in. So we're making sure we have that expertise of really understanding the local situation, the local politics, just living and breathing it. So the role of these local leads is to deliver that on the ground work, engage local stakeholders, and also look at additional funding where it could be available locally. And then finally, we have our business supporters. So without them, this isn't possible. They provide the funding for our projects, but more than that, they also provide steer and direction for us. And they also feed into information gathering exercise we have. So like we've done a big mapping exercise recently, and they fed into that through engaging their supply network. So as you can also see, there are a lot of big companies on the list on the slide here, and there's a lot of overlaps between the two projects. That's another way in which we're collaborating, making sure we signpost each other's projects when it's suitable. Okay, and finally, I'm going to do a very brief summary of our Spanish project. I could talk about this for a very long time, so if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards, please drop me an email or call me somewhere. Might regret saying that later. But so we have 6 priority areas within the southern Spain region. We've chosen southern Spain as it is one of the major sources of fresh produce, but it's also one of the most at-risk areas. We have chosen to focus firstly at Doñana and Murcia, partly because these are 2 of the biggest sourcing areas and 2 of the most at-risk zones. And also we want to make sure we have a good framework before we suddenly try to do 6 areas at once. So in Doñana, we're really looking at setting the framework for water stewardship. So making sure there is a repository of information available, making sure that there is a common framework for establishing legality within your supply chain, and really building the capacity of the companies engaged with us. In Murcia, it's much more of a shifting landscape, so it's more in the scoping phase, making sure that we are targeting action in the right areas. And we have Good Stuff International, GSI, on the screen. There are local leads who also happen to be the local leads in Peru, which really helps collaboration. And we have 17 businesses on board so far. And we have our steering group, which is made up of course, IDH, WWF Spain and UK, and also AWS. And I will pass back over to Christina.
Thanks a lot. Let me change the slide. Yeah, there we go. So you may also wonder why South Africa is not there. We are in the preliminary stages of scoping South Africa. So I'll focus on Peru for now. So I'll take you across the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific, to Peru, to the region of Ica, which is another at high risk catchment areas just south of Lima. It's a CFAB-led project hosted by IDH with the collaboration of other partners. And what are our goals? Similarly to what Spain's project is aiming to do, we're also looking to the aquifers there are very depleted. So we're looking not only to increase the water, that the repletion of these aquifers, but also increasing the retention of the water levels there. And then we are looking into how can we embed. We're aiming to how to embed this locally validated plan into a wider water stewardship plan. And with that, we are now in the first year inception phase, which is the result of a long participatory project. I think Alexis made mention to the importance of participation of all actors. So this is the outcome of this also for Spain, and we are looking into broadening it up for year 2 and year 3. GSI is also our local lead, and we are also counting with RAP, IDH, and CFAF, and also the Nature's Prize Foundation as funding. And we're also in talks with the Dutch government to see how we can complement this funding and also broaden our network within the area to share the learnings. And this is Peru and Spain, and it all sounds really good, and it's been a lot of effort. You all know you are involved in this sector, but that goes without saying that there's also some challenges. To start a project, you don't just barge in and say, well, this is our agenda. You need to, there are different needs, there are different stakeholders, there are different people and land and water and all these things. Once you're talking to them, you understand that you first need to also create this trust to be able to engage with them, and for this project to start on a foundational basis, right? You also, in this sort of participatory project or process, you also understand that there might be inequality of power and not everybody might be equally represented. We have NGOs, international or local, you have government bodies, you have farmers, you have local communities, you have workers. So how do we keep this a very transparent and participatory process? I think this sounds familiar to you. It might also apply to other projects, but also with water, which is something, it was referred to before. How do we all talk about metrics? I think we all agree that maybe that's not how you measure water and how you can express water in how the benefits of a project. You cannot just say you're going to have X liters of water next year, right? So how do we involve everybody? And then in involving everybody, how do you increase the capacity to have a infrastructure that is transparent, participatory, and that it allows for long-term sustainability change? I'll hand over to Sophie for the last challenges and the last reflection.
Thank you. So one of the other challenges, I'm going to summarize 2 points in one here, is a lack of frameworks. So we're currently lacking a common framework for both recording the progress of the projects, recording the compliance of the projects, but also how to embed the projects into the local situation. So we don't want these to be a project and then we go away and it stops. We want these to be carrying on long after we've left the area. And then the final one, and probably the biggest one, and this is one we'll all be aware of in the room, but water is a very local problem, but you have to look at it with a global lens. So you really need businesses to look at their whole supply chains, be able to see where they're sourcing from, seeing how they're impacting that area, driving change, but then also being able to scale it up to actually see the change we need across the water agenda. So to aid this is why we're putting quite so much time and effort into creating these multi-stakeholder projects and making sure that we are bringing in everyone along this journey. Cool, thank you very much. Right, let's sit down here.
Thank you, everyone. It's always good to come at 3 out of the 3rd presentation, because by then your expectation is low to me. So it's good. Thank you very much. My name is Sharif, and I'm representing H&M Group. So you might be wondering what H&M has to do with the water. And this is an answer probably that we will able to give you in next few minutes. And we have been going to share you our collective efforts that we have been done in one of our sourcing markets, Bangladesh. And we like to name it as a collective action paradox, because we have found, despite of so many possibilities, potentials, what are the lacks that has been forced us back to forge collective actions. And Bangladesh, just on a brief, it's a land of rivers, over 700 rivers in that country. And it's one of the largest delta, which has been called GBM, Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna, is the heart of that delta. But does it mean that we have a lot of water in that country? It's actually not. Many of our colleagues already knew that. It's kind of depending on the shared resources, which means that most of its water comes from transboundary sources. The GBM basins is already at risk because of overexploitation, barrages, and diversion of the water. Groundwater, despite a lot of surface water, groundwater is overused already at this country. Riverbed mining, encroachment of rivers, it's kind of a quite widespread. At the same time, what we have been seeing quite recently, the highest court has been kind of enabled all the rivers as a legal personhood, which means that they have the rights to live as a human in that country. But does it make the changes that we like to see over there? And on top of that, the climate changes has really made this whole situations much, much complex. Bangladesh being one of the most vulnerable countries over there. And you can see that just a 1.5 meters of sea level rise will actually displace 18 million people out of that country, and around one fourth of the land areas will be gone. So what is there for us? And then being a fashion company, why we are been talking about water? Because Bangladesh is already rose to kind of a number 2 countries as a sourcing of apparel and textile. This is last year, 2022, after China. And you can see that this is the kind of the growth engine of the whole industry. 83% of the GDP has been coming from the exports from the apparel and textile. And of course, most of the people who have been working in this sector is women. Around 1,700 washing, dyeing, finishing facilities are being responsible for this whole export that has been coming out of Bangladesh with the 45 billion USD. And what does it mean for us? Means that water, how it is impacted water. What we have been seeing is that all the key sourcing or key productions regions in Bangladesh are already at stake because of scarcity of water. The groundwater in the most important region where most of the production has been happening is declining with an alarming rate. Some studies says it's 2 to 3 meters. Some studies says it's more than 3. And last but not the least is that it's also kind of created pollutions to the surface water. And then if we look at just a kind of a very small area of the map in Bangladesh where we have marked it over here, this is called the Greater Dhaka watershed, and this is responsible for more than 40% of the GDP that has been coming from Bangladesh. Around 700 facilities has been there. These are the kind of 3-4 zones, Narayanganj, Gajipur, Savar, Ashulia, these are the zones. And this whole area has been surrounded by 4 rivers, which has been already at the kind of a very dire stage. How do we kind of acted on this kind of a set? We as a group, or H&M, we came into actions. We started our actions since 2012 when we kind of get into our partnership with WWF, and we actually kind of started our kind of collective actions in the form of water efficiency, water awareness, which is the kind of I think the most usual and the progressive way to see it. But then we have been worked out with the World Bank, International Finance Corporation, IFC. We have worked out with CV, the Sweden Textile Water Institute, and also a lot of the other brands together how we can increase the water efficiency and make the industry more cleaner than ever. This has been also continued with our partnership with WWF when in 2015, we actually came up with two publications that we did together together with WWF. One of the publications was been looking at what are the regulatory gaps in Bangladesh, and the other one has been looking at the economic risks on water, the way we have been handling in that. Both the reports, of course, as usual, has been looked into many of the loopholes and also the kind of a gap that is been available in the regulatory landscape. But that is something that we have been continue to discuss with the governance, with the regulatory bodies and everyone. That has been forced us to kind of form a Bangladesh multi-stakeholder partnerships together with the leadership of WRG 2030. We are one of the kind of apparel and textile brands who have been in the kind of the overall steering board. We have been actively collaborated at that point of time to publish the most analytical piece that has been came out of WRG. And in 2019, actually, we at that point of time knew that the way Bangladesh has been using its groundwater, it will not sustain, or it will not sustain the future that we want to see. And we have been, at that point of time, we did a rapid assessment in Bangladesh, the Greater Dhaka watershed, and to identify this is one of the most impactful area that we need to look at, and then make sure that we are been reducing our impact in the groundwater. And why is that? You can see some of the figures behind me is that both in terms of abstractions and depletions, both are in a very alarming stage in Greater Dhaka watershed. In 2022, we came up with, we joined together with AWS and Primark and started AWS Accelerator Program, where we have been looking at few of our suppliers, common suppliers. We have been chosen 30 of our suppliers together who have been located in the same basins to how to kind of we accelerate the learning of water stewardships into their facilities and the basins as well. This is the most recent work that has been ongoing, and this is will continue until middle of next year. And where we have been heading right now, I will end up with this kind of 3 areas where we see there are a lot of gaps when it comes to this watershed. When it comes to governance, of course, as we said, that there are kind of a weak enforcement, there are poor governance. We have seen that there are no basin authority in Bangladesh. Of course, there are WRPRO, which has been considered to be the highest body for the water management, but they do not have the kind of the right mandate to take the actions. And of course, kind of there are many long-term actions like Delta Plan 2100, but then we do not see the short-term planning, how to kind of make the changes that has been more immediate. When it comes to industry, we see a couple of challenges, like the industry is still viewing treating wastewater as an added cost. Of course, there are no economic driver because water is considered as total free. And when you get it free, you don't care at all. Of course, there is a knowledge and technology gap being one of the kind of developing countries. And of course, last but not the least, we see there are a lot of mindset issues over there. When it comes to us, brands, what the challenges we see? We see there is a lot of gap from ambition to action. Probably we have been, the whole industry has been very good at taking ambitions, but then when we look at how we have been walking our talk at the ground, that is something has been a gap area, I would say. Of course, not all the brands have been who have been working together they have a capacity. Of course, we have been looking forward the EU regulations that has been coming up starting from next year. So probably this will change pretty soon. And in many of the cases, of course, climate has been taking the kind of a climate circularity. Those are the areas who has been kind of prioritized over the agenda of water. Last but not least, of course, the industry is also been responsible or kind of criticized for its pricing issues and all those things. But I would say that if we just combine all three of these, the gap areas, it's a perfect storm to create a collective actions in the basins like this. And this is what we have been trying to do with many of our partners, and bring them all together and the peers as well, so that we can kind of make the changes that we should see. I will end up with two inspiration. And one of the inspiration is that this is the picture of a Rana Plaza tragedy, which has been take place in 2013. Over 1,000 workers died during that activity. And Bangladesh was considered one of the most kind of riskiest place when it comes to structural safety. But now, Bangladesh is also considered one of the most safest areas when it comes to structural safety. It's been 10 years only. How is it even possible? You can see that over 200 brands came together just to act on in Bangladesh to make sure they have a right structural safety, right electrical safety, and right building safety. Over 200 brands, governance, trade unions, they all came together and solved these things in 10 years. They have not only solved these things, now this model of working is been kind of replicated in other countries as well. Second, 2011, Greenpeace came out with this publications called Dirty Laundry, which has been criticized the fashion industries to use hazardous chemical into their product at that point of time. It's been kind of an industry or kind of an actions which many of the industry practitioners like us, we didn't have a clue how to even take these actions. But right now, the civil society, academia, chemical industries, brands, facilities, they all came together and created this platform of roadmap to actions, which has been actually made the industry much more advanced than compared to 2011. Now we have more clarity in terms of what to kind of take out, or how can we make sure that at least our produced garments doesn't have any hazardous substances when it comes to our production and also in the user phase. Of course, both the present kind of example is based on disasters, but I guess that it is disasters when humankind unleash their potentials. And then I believe that with the climate urgency and all this work, I think this is the time where we can probably fully stand up with water. And having all of you in this room on a Sunday makes that you believe in the same way like me. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna invite the final three panelists up, and then Jason, if you want to kick us off.
Thanks, Sheriff. And thanks to the WWF team for taking the lead on pulling this session together. Where do I stand here? Is that all right? I may fall off. So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening for those calling in. My name is Jason Morrison. I serve as the president of the Pacific Institute and the head of the Sea Water Mandate, which is a 15-year-old corporate water stewardship commitment platform. And I'm going to talk today with my few minutes about a collective action initiative called the Water Resilience Coalition that we launched in 2020. But I want to say that the conversations that preceded the launch were around three interrelated understandings. One, that globally, we're not on track to address the freshwater crisis, we being the human population. The second being that the business community has an important and unique role that it can play. And thirdly, that we need to work together collaboratively because no one company, even the leading companies, and these are the companies that were coming to these realizations, can have impact at scale in the way that's necessary to address water and water challenges in any water-stressed region globally. So when we launched the Water Resilience Coalition in 2012 on World Water Day, about 2 weeks before the world shut down to a global pandemic. We had seven members. Today we're 37 members, about 4 trillion in market capitalization, and we have about 18 partners from UN agencies and NGOs and other organizations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're coming at this issue. I only have a few minutes to do that, and I really look forward to the panel discussion where we can unpack how we do it better together, because there's a lot of room for improvement. One thing I want to start with is the concept of net positive water impact. And this is a commitment that companies make when they join the Water Resilience Coalition. And the reason that this ambition is important is that it's an enterprise level ambition. It's very broad. We'll unpack that, I'm sure, today. But it's what it allows is for the members within the coalition to have a shared ambition and joint purpose in the areas where they are working together. And what we mean here when we use the ambition net positive water impact, importantly, is not just about water volume or water quantity. It also includes water quality and water access and sanitation and hygiene for impoverished communities. So when companies make a commitment to net positive water impact, they're making a commitment in places where they have operations that are water stressed to address those 3 dimensions of water. We recently released some operational guidelines that are being pilot tested. If you're interested in learning more about it, my colleague Greg Brill, raise your hand, Greg. You can learn more from Greg about how that work goes. But in a nutshell, companies that subscribe to this concept have 3 pillars of activity. One is around reducing footprint. This is the reduction of water use in operations and pollution reduction. The second is about restoring and investing in offsetting the impacts associated with the footprint that's remaining. This is what many companies think of as their replenish commitment or their balancing commitment. There are a lot of different terms for it. And the third pillar of activity is working collectively to have impact at scale in basins. So collective action is embedded in the aspiration of net positive water impact. Another unique aspect around the WRC is that it's the first initiative to establish a shared ambition, a long-term shared ambition. And in 2021, the CEOs of the leadership companies within the initiative agreed upon the 2030 roadmap for collective action. And there's a couple of elements to this that I want to talk about. One is that we set a goal of having collective positive water impact in 100 basins by 2030. And I'm going to come back to that commitment. Specifically, there's a commitment to enable climate resilient water access and sanitation for at least 300 million people by that same time. And lastly, there's a commitment to bring in some of the biggest water using companies in the world. There was an analysis done at the beginning of at the inception of the WRC that demonstrated that if you look at the value chain, the full value chain of the largest 150 companies within the UN Global Compact, for those not familiar with the UN Global Compact, it's the largest corporate sustainability network in the world with over 18,000 businesses. If you look at just the 150 largest water using companies, that accounts for 1/3 of global annual withdrawals. So the logic of this initiative is that if you bring in the ones that really have an impact on water into the fold and have them working collaboratively in these 100 water stress basins, then you can have impact at scale. And that's the goal. So that's what's embedded in the roadmap as the goals of it. There was a recognition that a small group of companies can't do this alone. And so in the lead up to the water conference in March, we began working with our peers in the water stewardship space and in the business community. And some of you may have heard of the Business Leaders Open Call for Accelerated Action on Water. A cornerstone of that commitment is collective positive water impact in 100 basins. And we worked with a number of the practitioners in the space to come up with an agreed upon list This isn't the perfect list. Everyone's going to want to work in other regions, but these 100 water stress basins account for where over 3 billion people live, and it is definitely a place where we can accelerate action by working together. Last thing I want to say on this is, in this next chapter, as we move forward with trying to roll this out to more businesses, the change theory here is we need more companies, not just the leading companies in this room, to get engaged in this. And we need to make it as easy as possible. And I hope this comes up in the panel discussion, because right now the barrier to entry to engage in collaborative structures is hard for companies that have rarely wrapped their head around water. We need to make this as easy as possible if we're going to get them in. But what we're planning to do, we're on our way to do, is to use these 100 basins as a place where we can do a similar assessment of the basin context, then bring stakeholders together to have a conversation around what are the most important water issues in this basin, what are the goals that we'll set together, and how do we measure progress on doing that? And most of the water stewardship initiatives are doing some version of that already. WRG, 2030 WRG has been using a similar model to that since they've been in operations, even though they're not here today. So it makes sense. This is how we think we can then connect those companies to those leaders on the ground that are doing that work. TNC has been a partner so far, but looking forward to partnering with other organizations that are doing the on-the-ground basin work. And I think I'm handing to.
Thank you, Jason. So my name is Caroline Black. I'm a research analyst at World Resources Institute and serve on the Freshwater Hub for Science-Based Targets for Nature. So the Freshwater Hub of SBTN is a convening of a few organizations, including CDP, WRI, TNC, WWF, with technical advisory from Limnotech. And our main goal is to create a target setting framework for and guidance for companies and cities to set socially equitable science-based targets. So I'll just preface that target setting for freshwater is not a collective action approach, but the aim is that the guidance and the methods will make it easier to embed collective action in individual company strategies. So I'll just go through the 5 steps of SBT freshwater targets and kind of let you know where collective action can be infused in those steps. So the first is the assessment of the impacts and dependencies for companies. The second is then prioritization of locations for action. And so collective action is strengthened by this prioritization. The 100 basins that are pointed out, those are the key areas that should be prioritized in collective action. And there should be a set framework and tools such as the WWF water risk filter and WRI's aqueduct to engage in that initial prioritization. The third, so then there is the setting and disclosing of targets. The third action point is taking action to achieve those targets. And the aim when the 4th step is out is that AWS and net positive water impact will be included and embedded and taken into account in that step. The 5th step, which is also forthcoming, is monitoring, reporting, and verifying progress on the ground. So steps 4 and 5 encourage, of course, companies to engage collective action stakeholders and those on the ground in local basins. And the hope is that emerging initiatives that help calculate that collective actor input will inform steps 4 and 5 as well. So thank you, and I'll pass on to Tyler.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me at this session. My name is Tyler Farrow. I'm Standards Manager with the Alliance for Water Stewardship. The Alliance for Water Stewardship is a member-based collaboration, but we're also the custodians of a robust and credible sustainability standard for water stewardship, known as the AWS standard. So the AWS standard is really a framework for companies to understand and act on their water risks in a credible and systematized way. And it offers a pathway to collective action that is quite unique, and I think complementary to a lot of the initiatives that we've heard about here today. So by going through this standard, really, when you think about collective action, the starting point should be to really understand what your own impact is. What sort of impact are you having on water before you then engage with others? And the standard provides a framework for sites to really get their own houses in order before they then go and engage with others, right? It offers a pathway to really become collective action ready, I think is the catchphrase that we've used. So, and it does that in a number of ways. First, by using the standard, site staff become, essentially they understand their water risks, they build their capacity in terms of action when it comes to water stewardship. They also go through a rigorous stakeholder engagement process. So they understand who are relevant stakeholders within our local catchment context. We engage with them and how to work with them in an appropriate way. And finally, by going through the phase of certification and getting certified against the standard, it gives a site a good standing in terms of demonstrating their credibility on water before they go then and engage with others. I think Sharif mentioned earlier the Impact Accelerator program. So this is an initiative of the Alliance for Water Stewardship, which is really all about bringing together many sites who are working on the standards in the same places to really amplify impact and to pool resources and to create a network of peer support. So really, when you look at the AWS system, we have generally two types of users. We have companies who are using the standard within their own facilities, so sites that they legally own. And then we have those who are working more so through their supply chains. So they're working with their suppliers to implement water stewardship and to implement the standard. So there's a real, I think, opportunity when you look at those, especially who are working with their suppliers, to work in clusters. So many times you'll find that producers are located within the same area, and the Impact Accelerator it takes advantage of that opportunity to work together with many suppliers in that same catchment. So it's a model, I think, that can be, it's a model, I think, that is replicable. Really, when you look at the Impact Accelerator, we have kind of two hopes. First is that the sites who are engaged in the Impact Accelerator will essentially be leveraged to be involved in other collective action initiatives that we heard about here today and others. And also, when NGOs are setting up collective action initiatives, that they'll consider this approach of the Impact Accelerator to bring sites up to a good performance of water stewardship and to get their own houses in order before they engage with others. Thank you very much.
All right. I am going to precariously balance myself. Thankfully, I have my vacation footwear with me. So, and we're going to kind of move over into a bit of a panel discussion. While I do this, I want everybody in the both online audience as well as the audience in the room here to start to think about some questions that you would like to ask to the panel in a moment, because I'd like to make sure that you have an opportunity to kind of weigh in as well. But I'm going to kick things off by asking a broad kind of couple of questions. And as we discussed, feel free to pick this up, add high quality content, and keep answers short. So high level things. One, was there anything that another panelist mentioned that you caught you and you thought, you know what, that was a really good reflection, and that kind of brings up something else that I was really thinking about? Or secondly, the other kind of question I'll throw out to all of you is, we're in a very magical place. Stockholm is a lovely city. And if you had a magical wand, what is the one thing that you would try to fix around collective action at this point?
Thank you. Something actually you mentioned around greenhouse gases quite often taking over the agenda. So that's something we're seeing across the board, in that you quite often have to link water to the greenhouse gas agenda to get enough attention for it. So that's something that I would like to see to change, is that people to start seeing the value of water in itself, because obviously none of your nature-based solutions to try to get us out of the climate crisis are going to work without water. If we don't have water, a lot of our carbon sinks are going to become carbon sources. It's a massive part of the story, and it shouldn't just be it doesn't need to be tied to greenhouse gases for it to be on the agenda.
So Sophie, you brought up kind of the compounding impact of longer term projects. And I guess this touches on both of your questions, but if I could kind of get rid of the barrier for long-term projects and really infuse resilience planning and future projections data and historical data to kind of do that deeper, more enriched planning for projects. And that also involves catalytic funding that starts new projects and brings in additional co-funders. So those are kind of my blended answer to your two questions.
Thanks. I think maybe something implicit in all of our talks is that we also, I think a big challenge is also some of the political situations, right? We talk about that water is a global issue, but it's very locally embedded. So, and for many ways, the political situation can be enabling, but we also face a challenge that it may not always be the case. For example, in our project in Peru, where there was some upbringing, some instability, and we had to put on pause our participatory aspect of the project, which is very a key component of that. We couldn't reach the farmers, or we couldn't reach the producers to sort of bring their voices into the project, right? So I don't know if a magic wand is possible anymore, because we face highly complex processes and the globalization, but how can we make it so it's in the political agenda also, no matter what government or ideology sort of drives their own country agenda? I know it's a big wish, but I think keep engaging and keep bringing this into the agenda, not only under greenhouse emission agenda. Thanks.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll touch on the magic wand question. I think I was really struck by what Sharif was saying about that disaster in Bangladesh and seeing essentially what people are capable of when they come together, right? And I think if I could have a wish, it would be really to instill that sense of urgency within the water stewardship space, right? We know largely what we need to do, and we've seen what we're capable of when people come together collectively. So really, if I could have a wish, it would be to instill that sense of urgency in terms of how we do that. I think maybe we started to get some of these conversations around, accountability and incentives, and how do we really spur on the collective action we need.
Alexis, probably I will also use the same second questions to answer. And of course, since I'm from business, I would expect that that magical power should be given so that the WWF, TNC, CO Water Mandate, WRI, they at least speak in the business languages. Sometimes the overall scientific and technical information is really take us a blow, and it not goes through in the organizations like us, where we have been in terms of KPI, in terms of impact, making them sense of money. So I'm looking forward for those days when we will really able to convert collective actions into those things.
You triggered people on stage. I'd like, you're a moderator. You don't get to respond. I want to build on it, actually. So it's a two-part answer. One thing that jumped out at me about this whole panel is how clear and distinct each of these efforts are. And so to the folks that make the assertion that the space is confused and crowded, I don't buy into that. It's actually very distinct to what these different initiatives are doing and how they're coming at it. So, and water is inherently complex, and we got to address and live with that complexity. That said, to Shariful's point, I think we're still doing this in a way that's so confusing to newcomers in the business community that the barrier to entry is very high. And the magic wand I would like to wave is to make this a lot easier for newcomers that are getting the notion that they need to do something on water in the face of climate change can plug in on a much more efficient and accelerated basis. Right now, if you think about the companies that have led, they are the ones that single-handedly do a basin analysis and a diagnostic. Then they do the curation process to find good partners. That's just that's a heavy lift, and it's super inefficient from a systems level. Why would you have 25 companies with interest in the same basin all doing proprietary basin assessments to figure out what they should focus on? And how much time, if you're the water lead at a company, how much time do you do finding partners and getting into contracts with them? What about if there could be an easier way to just be able to say, these are effective partners in this area? And we know that because we have a consistent way of measuring their impact against baseline, right? That's the magic wand I would like to wave, so that we can all start making it easier for these second and third movers to come in. And then I think you're going to get real change in these basins once you get the economic interest in these basins to figure out how they can support the great work on the ground.
Okay, Nabia.
Okay, hard to follow applause for an answer, but I would just say one of the things that struck me in all of the presentations was the amount of time that we've been having this conversation. So hearing people mention, you know, it was 2010 or 2012 or 2017 that we began these conversations. And it really struck me and kind of brought this idea that kind of collaboration moves at the speed of trust to my head. And I think that's very true. You know, we all have these different ideas. We have different initiatives that we'd like to move forward, but until you're able to get that buy-in to kind of move people together, it can take some time. So I think waving a magic wand to help people understand that these issues are complex, it can take some time. And how can we work together with the business community, with others to see, yes, we want quarterly updates, we want annual impact measurements, but it also may take a couple of years to get to know each other. And that's okay for us to have impact at a watershed kind of regional, national scale. So that would be another magic wand I'd like to wave.
Awesome. Thank you. Rather than respond, I'm going to throw things now back open to both the live audience here as well as the online audience. So we'll try to pick up any questions that are there. But yeah, I'll take a few questions and then we'll kind of put those back into the group. So maybe, do we have a second roaming mic or not? Don't know if we do. Okay, well, maybe if you can just speak up and then I'll repeat it on here so that the online people can hear it. So just to repeat that for the online audience, the question was around decision-making and collective action. Everything's great, everyone wants to work together, but how do you actually do that and what are some of the challenges linked to that? And before we throw that to the panel, I think there was a second hand up over there. So.
So that's how do you bring those together? How do you get companies really involved in buying into it?
So again, just to kind of synthesize, and hopefully I got this right. The question was kind of that a lot of companies still see a lot of the collective action piece as being a government responsibility. And so how do you incentivize companies to participate in these kinds of platforms? And is there a third question? Yes, over here.
A couple different times the question of moving at the speed of trust, long-term investments came up. So I'd love to hear from any of the panelists. What are you finding that actually helped to break through to get longer-term funding in the door to build these collective action processes? And then my second question is, Sharif, you had these really incredible stats about I believe it was 80% of exports from the garment industry. And for me, there's two pieces. There's how do we make sure that the practices are in the garment industry are more sustainable, and then also where is the economic metabolism actually out of sync with the natural system metabolism, which is, you know, where a tension arises between corporate interests and their value chains and, you know, the actual the ecology and sustainable livelihoods. So if anyone wanted to pick up on that tension in the space, I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
So that question was just around issues of how do we secure long-term funding for these pieces, given that they take a long time, and a question of how do we address some of the tensions when the kind of economic system is maybe out of sync with sustainability systems. So hopefully I got that synthesized correctly. There is one more hand over there, so I'll take one more quick question and then we'll throw it to the group. So that question was related to just the scope setting in science-based targets, and how do we make sure that we're going beyond just the value chain and into the base of the pyramid and the global south, and making sure that issues of equity are being kind of accounted for and all of that, which is also something I know that there was an online question that came in during the discussions just around ensuring that accountability is being held, that companies are being held to account on kind of performance in different places. And this issue that came up in the talk around IDH and RAP on kind of participatory equity, and making sure that we have voices from those who don't have power being represented in things, which I think picks up on that last question as well. So there were a whole bunch of different things there. You can feel free to sort of cherry pick out of those things that you'd like to pick up on. And I will throw back to the panel.
So I have the microphone, so I can answer. One of the questions around kind of the long-term funding is one that comes to mind based on some of the Nature Conservancy's experience in this space. And I agree, it is very challenging, especially to some of what we've been talking about in terms of annual funding cycles and trying to kind of move beyond that. But I think what we've tried to think about is how can you set up a longer term vision, a larger vision for what you're trying to achieve with the initiative, as well as kind of multi-year planning that can allow for different funders to plug in over time. So if we're setting up a 30-year vision, so in the Cape Town case, it was a business case over 30 years, kind of where do we want to get to, and then kind of breaking that up into smaller chunks. For the first 5 years, we'll do this, and then we'll reassess after 3 years and move it to the next 5 years, for example. And so that can help a funder to see, okay, in this phase of the program, this is what they're going to be focusing on. This is where the impacts might come through. And if I have a year or two of funding, I can put it directly to that. So I would just say trying to take a long-term vision, but breaking it up into more manageable chunks can help you to bring in different types of strategic funding in those spaces.
I'm curious. I maybe might probe as well a little bit. I'm going to take facilitator license on this. Can anybody speak to in particular, because there were two questions that tied to this, the issue of kind of issues around governance, decision making, and power, and balancing power structures and governance.
Yeah, this might be slightly off base from the intent of the question, but I just wanted to emphasize that really when we look at water stewardship, that this is done within a broader context of water governance and decision-making bodies, right? Like we really try to emphasize within the standard that what we do should be complementary and should fit into existing frameworks. Things like water users associations should fit within catchment management plans. So I think I'd just like to emphasize the fact that there's a lot that's already there in terms of decisions that have been made and bodies that are there to make those decisions. As much as possible, we should be aligning with and complementing those.
Yeah, just quickly on government's role in all of this. So obviously government does have a role. They do need to be setting policies to make this real systemic change, but they really can't move as fast as businesses can. Businesses are much more agile. They can make changes so much quicker than government ever could. So while they definitely have a role in it, I don't think it's a bad thing that businesses are leading the way.
And maybe touching upon the decision making that was done, for example, for us as a multi-stakeholder, we have different parties involved, and it's a highly consultative process in terms of, we have a working group, we've had meetings, we've had drafts being sent back and forth, and that's, I think, the reality of all of us here. How many have sent comments on, track changes on a document to just make sure that the proposal does make sense, but also ensuring that, for example, for us was really important that not only in the longer term of securing finance, which I think it would be naive to say that that's not a goal in itself, because you want the sustainability of the project to go, but how do we include the local communities without you cannot just barge in and do something that won't sustain itself, and you need to also think of an exit strategy. What's going to happen if, for example, we have a 3-year program? There are other programs that are longer term, but for us it's 3 years. Now, what's going to happen when this project, what we're building and the participation that we're creating really sort of sustains and really makes sure that the aquifer continues to be refilled, that the local capacity is built. So what we're building does actually mean that water will infiltrate the aquifer. And there's also back a bit on the reflection on talking about to businesses in business language. Everybody involved also wants the long-term production. For example, the area continues to produce products that we can all eat. So finding those common sort of key points to bring into the negotiations and say, okay, we don't make a decision until everybody sort of agrees on this. May seem very basic, but I think it's really finding the simplicity of what we all want in a process. And we have a working group, we have collaboration, we have governments, which sometimes it's hard to bring in because indeed we move at different speeds, and that's also something to acknowledge.
And while we're doing that, I just want to check in on online. Okay, if there are any other online questions, please do feel free to submit them before we begin to wrap up.
Alexis, I probably will respond to the government roles on the collective actions and all those things. And I will answer this in a different way. When it comes to climate, it's been completely different. Climate, you don't need to look at the kind of governance or kind of any of the organizations to set your own goals. There is a clear methodology, there is a clear guidance, and you can go ahead with your own value chain approach and calculate that thing and then set your own goals. But when it comes to water, you obviously need to go to a kind of a certain location since it's a local issues. And there is the challenge when who will take the first actions. And we believe that the role of governance is very, very high, acting as an enabler, because then it can convene the rest of the stakeholders into that basins or certain locations. And we believe that the overall learnings that we have been so far, it's not about the 1 or 2 organizations or 10 organizations. As long as the governance and our governmental or regulations has been come up with their own actions, the speed of changes is much faster than we actually expect to.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'm going to try to answer that question about public sector role as well, and then also this question and critique about the SBTN approach. So let me use the metaphor of if your house was on fire, would you take action or just say, well, that's the role of the fire department and I'm going to wait till they get here? I think that's an apt metaphor because the world, when it comes to water, is on fire and everyone needs to act. We need to move as quickly as we can. I would agree with the notion that the business community can move quickly and is showing that they do that well, and also that they're willing to invest in innovative approaches, something that is not exactly prevalent in the public sector entities within the water sector. I really think that the Nature Conservancy has done a great job of translating some of that initial action and investment by businesses into partnerships with the public sector that allows not only the policies, but the public sector spend that can scale. And I think we all know that in order to really drive the impact at scale, you're going to need public sector engagement and policy and spend. And I think it's one of the flagship basins that we're working with TNC in. And in Sao Paulo started with 4 to 5 million in corporate spend, which is now leveraged a 7-to-1 spend by the public sector, something along those lines, which makes it a good business investment. If you're thinking about how do I build water security and resilience here, if I know I can get things started, that's going to eventually leverage public dollars. That makes a lot of sense. To the concern about the base of pyramid being left out of these strategies, I just want to make the point that companies are asked to understand where in their value chain there's the impacts and dependencies relating to water. If you're an agribusiness company, a lot of that is your sourcing regions, and the expectation is that you understand where those impacts and dependencies are, and you probably should start by taking action in the places where you have the most impact and you're most reliant on water. That makes sense. If the company's concern is the challenge of inequitable allocation of water and the fact that 2 billion people don't have safely managed drinking water, then typically a company would address that issue through their philanthropy and may invest in places where the problem is most pronounced, but they may not have a footprint. Those are kind of two different parts of the company and two different ways of thinking about how a company could be engaged. We would say it's a responsible company to focus on the places, whether it's your direct operations or in your value chain, where water is most important to you, but also where you are having most impact on the resource.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And I'll just echo on that. We've seen companies in that initial assessment of impacts and dependencies find that their greatest impact is upstream in the value chain, downstream in the value chain, in the consumer value chain, and in the consumer consumption of that product, and really push companies to set those targets that affect those areas. And hopefully in funding actions on the ground, people can scale those methods and techniques on the ground and then apply them to other regions.
So I'm going to hold there because we only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to kind of begin to provide a little bit of a wrap up. And before I thank the panel and everything else, I'm just going to do my concluding remarks, and then you can thank all of us. I'm gonna leverage off of their good performance in the mix of all of this. So a few things, and maybe just my own kind of remarks on some of the questions that are in the mix of all of this. I think the issue of power when it comes to this, whether that's indigenous communities, women, other, marginalized groups out there, there is a really, really critical aspect of all of this that comes back to governance. And that is different very much from government. Government absolutely has a role to play in this, and sometimes a very critical role when it comes to governance, because they are they're a core stakeholder when it comes to a public resource, which is water ultimately. But that is a very different thing. And I think one of the big challenges that we've faced in all of this, and we will continue to face, is the tension between wanting to move quickly because we all recognize the house is on fire, and the fact that business can and wants to move quickly, and we want to move quickly too. But if you move very quickly, usually you erode trust and governance issues. And so there's a balance and a tension point between those things, making sure that we don't just run roughshod over local communities. And that's a tension point. It's part of the reason we often work slowly. And I think NGOs are a critical interface in the mix of that to try to make sure that's there. It's not a replacement for the voice of local communities, but it is a mechanism to try to slow that, to enable those. But it's a tough challenge, I think, at the end of the day. I think standards like the AWS standard are very critical for that because they facilitate dialogue with local communities as part of it, which is a really critical part of this. So it's a challenge, and I think it's going to be an ongoing one, and it's the tension point between wanting to move quickly, and I'm happy to talk net present value with you anytime, Sharif. But that tension point, I think, is one. So a few kind of just other concluding remarks on all of this. One, I think in all of this, as we go forward on collective action, we're going to need more and more on common metrics and accountability. I think the group as a whole is moving in that direction. There's efforts underway under the Water Resilience Coalition. There's elements of AWS. There's elements of science-based targets. There's a lot of dialogue on what metrics we're moving towards in that whole space. as we proceed, these issues of governance and the models of governance that we have all deployed and thinking about how those are addressing issues of power are something that I think is going to be really important. And I think there are some amazing and proven models that we can build off. In particular, the apparel sector, I think, is doing some phenomenal things, and they've got some really neat things afoot on all of that. For us, as we kind of take the next steps forward in all of this, first, there is this paper. Do feel free to have a look at it. If you're struck by it, think it's terrible, think it's missing something, are blown away and just want to send us all some compliments to make us feel good, whatever it is, feel free to weigh in on that. We are moving into further implementation, and I think we are trying to test some models on this. I am very personally keen to think about how do we not only deploy this, but think through both these issues of governance and think through models of financing, because we need to get to scale on the financing piece. Some of that is around grants and sharing money amongst all of us to make sure that we all have an incentive to come together and collaborate, not a disincentive to collaborate. But also this question of how do we not only scale up the question of grants and philanthropy and corporate funds there, but also green bonds, the debt space, all of that side of it, and link that into the collective action piece so that it's not just one-to-many big funding things, but many-to-many big funding things. So there will be a kind of a component of that. That's going to require supplier mapping as we go through all of this and digging into a lot of that. It's also another piece we are increasingly leaning into, just so that people understand the future on some of these things. A lot of us are also looking to the AI space and thinking about how can we automate this much faster to think about scaling solutions, finding solutions, mapping solutions, and again, getting that out more readily available to communities that can't pay for these sorts of things so that it's freely accessible, again, to address power issues. So those are some of the things that are going forward. My final plea would be, do engage us. All of us are here. This is not a singular journey. This is a collective journey, whether you are here as an NGO, as an academic, as a government member, as another business. Do reach out, do plug into this. This is an ongoing and collective discussion that we are moving forward. And so I encourage all of you to join us as we go forward on this journey. So with that, a big thank you to the panelists. And a very final thank you to both the technical team as well as my colleague Rylan Dobson, who helped to coordinate a lot of this while I was out gallivanting over the summer.